Hello, PFFL players. Welcome to the first ever Waiver Wire Pickup Show. I'm your host, Josh Martin, and I'm going to do this show every week to give you the guys that you should be adding this week, dropping this week, plus a few guys you should keep your eye on and possibly pick up in the next few weeks. Coming up in today's show, I've got a running back who no one owns that could get a lot of carries, a number one wide receiver who should be on your roster, plus I'll give you 5 guys who are 100% owned in PFFL who I believe should not be owned at all. But first, it's time for Out of the Pocket.
He drops back, under pressure, scrambling around. He's out of the pocket. He's got to find someone.
In this segment, every week, I'm going to give you a guy who may be at the bottom of my rankings, which, by the way, can be found on the PFFL website. But if you're scrambling around for a guy that could get you a big game, this is the one you want. This week is a guy at tight end who scored a touchdown in the first 2 weeks of the season. He's owned in 0% of leagues. That's right, he's not owned at all. He's got a really nice schedule coming up, and that's the Bills tight end Scott Chandler. The next few weeks, here's the Bills games. At Cleveland, versus New England, at San Francisco, fair enough, at Arizona, and home to Tennessee. In 4 out of those 5 matchups, I think Chandler has a chance to score anywhere from 12 to 15 points. He's a touchdown machine. This is the guy they give the red zone targets to. This is the guy they're looking for in the middle of the field. David Nelson just went down with an injury in week 1. He's out for the rest of the season. Who are the other Bills receivers? Stevie Johnson and CJ Spiller, right? That's it. It's got to be Chandler. He's their third target. He's their number 1 target in the red zone, number 1 target in the middle of the field. This is the guy you want to pick up. He's not on anyone's radar. I'm telling you to put him on yours. Put him on your team. If you've got a guy like Aaron Hernandez or Antonio Gates, both who got hurt, Antonio Gates wasn't active. He's questionable for this week. Hernandez sprained his ankle. He's out for probably 3 to 4, maybe 5 weeks. This is a guy you should pick up. Put him on your team. Start him this week against Cleveland. Start him next week against New England. Maybe don't start him against San Francisco. But then he's got Arizona and Tennessee. All teams that don't do well against the tight end. This is the guy you want to add. I'm telling you, he's coming out of nowhere. He's going to get you a touchdown in probably 3 out of the next 5 weeks. What I'm also going to do in this show every week is I'm going to give you position by position guys who I think you should add and guys who I think you should drop. I'm not going to talk about kickers because let's face it, if you want to talk kickers, you can email, you can tweet the show if you want. You can follow me on Twitter at JoshMartin33. If you want to talk kickers, I'll be happy to take your questions, but really, I'm not going to waste anybody's time on kickers. I'm also not going to talk about quarterbacks, and here's why. Most of the PFFL leagues are 12-team leagues. In fact, all of them are. So more than likely, you've got your starting quarterback. 12 guys in my rankings. The top 12 quarterbacks from last week were Brady, Rodgers, Breeze, Ryan, Newton, Manning, Stafford, Rivers, Griffin, Cutler, Romo. Those are all guys who are probably on your team, probably starting. There's no reason to drop any of them. You might have Vic. You might have Roethlisberger. Now, if you look at your backup quarterback, I'll go over this real quickly. If your backup is somebody like Mark Sanchez, Matt Castle, Josh Freeman, I would drop them. I'd pick up Andy Dalton or Alex Smith as my backup. If your backup is Joe Flacco, drop him. Flacco got a lot of hype in week 1, came back to earth in week 2. I think that's where he'll stay. That's all the time I'm going to spend on quarterbacks. Because like I said, it's a 12-team league. You should have your quarterback. You should know who your starter is every week. Once we get into buys, maybe I'll talk a little bit more about them. Let's dive into some running backs. The first guy that I'm telling you who you should add, 0% owned in PFFL. 0%. Nobody owns him. It's Miami Dolphins running back Lamar Miller. Daniel Thomas just got hurt. Might miss a couple weeks, maybe longer. Lamar Miller scored a touchdown. His next 4 weeks, home to the Jets, at Arizona, at Cincinnati, home against St. Louis. Those are all teams you can run on. All of them you can run on and get touchdowns. Is Reggie Bush the guy there? Sure, of course. Do you think that's going to last forever? Me neither. I'm not knocking Reggie Bush. He's got history now. He did it all of last year. He's done it for the first 2 weeks. He looks really good. But now Lamar Miller is going to get some carries. I'm not saying you start him over Reggie Bush. I'm saying pick him up, put him on your roster. It's a guy who could blow up. Guy at running back I want you to drop this week, owned in 100% of leagues, Sean Green and Roy Halou. And in 95% of leagues, Ryan Williams from the Cardinals. Those three guys totaled 3 points last week. If you listened to my Stardom Sit 'em show last week, and if you listen to it this Friday, which, by the way, we do that every Friday here on PFFL Radio Network. I'll be with you Friday telling you who to start and who to sit. If you listened to it last week, you know I'm a huge Alfred Morris guy. Apparently so is Mike Shanahan. Roy Halou got no points, no carries. He's owned in 100% of leagues. Drop him today. Same thing with Sean Green. He got you 2 points. Next few weeks at Miami. Not bad. But then home to San Francisco, home to Houston, home to Indianapolis, at New England. Those 4 games, teams you cannot run on. San Francisco, Houston, Indianapolis. Yeah, Indianapolis defense isn't that great. Look what they just did to Adrian Peterson. Same thing with New England. They're containing guys in New England. Drop Sean Green. And as far as Ryan Williams goes, I always say with rookies or second-year guys, it's about talent plus opportunity. He's getting the opportunity. It looks like the talent isn't what everyone thought it was going to be. So the problem with Ryan Williams is he's just not being very productive. And I would say drop him right now. Pick up Lamar Miller. When you look at wide receivers, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. My rankings are always going to reflect the fact that PFFL is not PPR. That's a lot of P's. It's not PPR, and that's good. It's not supposed to be. Everyone plays by the same rules. That's awesome. I love that about PFFL. I'm sure you do too. So it becomes a little bit tricky when you're looking at wide receivers because you need production from yards and touchdowns. So 2 guys I'm going to give you right now who I think you should add are guys who are better PPR guys but are starting to prove their worth as far as production goes. Tampa Bay wide receiver Mike Williams and St. Louis wide receiver Danny Amendola. So look at Mike Williams' schedule. Look at Tampa Bay. At Dallas, home to Washington. Then they have a bye. Kansas City, New Orleans. All teams that can be thrown on. And Mike Williams is the number 2 in Tampa Bay. Vincent Jackson getting a lot of attention, as he should. Vincent Jackson's the number 1 there, right? But Mike Williams has caught a touchdown the last 2 weeks. He scored 11 points in week 2 in PFFL. He's only owned in 66% of leagues. So look at your league, especially if you're in tier 2 or tier 3. You need home run guys. Mike Williams is a home run guy. There's going to be weeks where he gets you 0, but there's going to be weeks where he gets you 11 to 15. You need that guy in your roster. He's a good flex start. Danny Amendola is the number 1 guy in St. Louis. He might be the only guy in St. Louis, and I love him. Bradford is under pressure because of how bad their offensive line is. When he's under pressure, he looks for those dump-offs, and that's where Danny Amendola comes in. He is the guy who is going to get most of the passes. Like I said, he's a little bit more of a PPR guy, but he's starting to prove that he can do overall production. He's got yards. He'll start to get touchdowns. He scored 21 points in week 2. He's only owned in 61% of leagues in PFFL. Pick him up today. Start him in week 3. They're going to Chicago. Sure, bad matchup. Then they play Seattle. Okay, not great. But then Arizona and at Miami. Those 2 weeks are when you should target Danny Amendola. But by then, it might be too late to pick him up. So pick him up today. That's the guy you want to pick up at wide receiver. Guys you want to drop, I'm out on James Jones. I'm out. He's only owned in 52% of PFFL. But I'll tell you what, that's 52% too much. Look at what he did last week without Greg Jennings in the lineup. He scored 0 points. 0 points. You need to drop him if he's on your team. Greg Jennings is coming back this week. Now, sure, does that maybe help James Jones get a couple of looks? He scored a couple touchdowns in week 1. Absolutely. I'll buy that. I hear you. But my problem with that is it's not guaranteed production. You need guaranteed production. If you're in tier 1, you want to win your league. Get that prize money. If you're in tier 2 or 3, you need to win your league so you can start moving up. You can't pin your hopes on a guy who's taking up a roster spot and not getting you production, drop him. Drop James Jones. Laurent Robinson, Jacksonville, 95% owned in PFFL. Get him out. Scored 0. Anquan Bolden, 100%. I think he can be dropped. Torrey Smith is the deep target on the Ravens. Joe Flacco, I already told you, I don't think he's going to be good this year. I'm done with Flacco. You need to be done with Anquan Bolden. Drop him. Get a guy who's going to get you production every week. That's who you need on your team. Robert Meacham, same thing. Now, Robert Meacham, I will tell you, I really like his schedule coming up. He's home against Atlanta, at Kansas City, at New Orleans. Good schedule. He's a home run guy. He's last on my list of wide receivers to dump for that reason. He's a guy who will probably get you 0 points most weeks, but when you play him for a matchup like against Kansas City or against New Orleans, he might get you 2 or 3 touchdowns. He's their deep threat in San Diego, but right now he's not getting many looks. So I would drop him in favor of a guy like Mike Williams or Danny Amendola. Moving over to tight ends, I love tight ends this week, and I'm going to tell you why. There are so many guys who are owned in very little leagues that can get you a lot of production in PFFL. I told you about Scott Chandler. He's my out-of-the-pocket pick for this week. Another guy who's owned in very little leagues, Martellus Bennett of the New York Giants. He's 38% owned. That's it, 38%. Get him. Put him on your team. Just like Chandler, scored touchdowns in the first 2 weeks of the game. He had 10 targets last week against the Buccaneers. 10 targets for a tight end. That's approaching Gronkowski and Graham numbers. Eli Manning is a guy who loves to throw to the tight end, and Martellus Bennett is number 1 on their depth chart. His production will not stop. Can he score a touchdown every week? No, probably not. Fair enough, but he'll do it most weeks. Put him on your team. Again, if you got a guy like Aaron Hernandez, Antonio Gates who got hurt, drop him. Get Martellus Bennett on your team. Another guy who I really like is Kyle Rudolph for the Minnesota Vikings. He had 9 points last week. He's only owned in 33% of leagues. This is a big, tall red zone target for Christian Ponder. Now this week, he's home against San Francisco. Not a great matchup. But the next 4 weeks, at Detroit, home to Tennessee, at Washington, home to Arizona. Great matchups for the tight end. He'll get a touchdown in probably 2 or 3 of those weeks. Put him on your roster this week. Don't start him against San Francisco, but put him on your roster and hold him for those next 4 weeks. Another couple of guys at tight end, Dennis Pitta, Joe Flacco's safety blanket. Here's a guy who I'm sort of out on the Baltimore offense in case you haven't noticed, but this is a guy you can put on your team. Put him on the bench. He's a good bye-week fill-in. He's Flacco's safety blanket. He will get targets. The last one is Heath Miller. Heath Miller is only owned in 4% of PFFL leagues. 4%. He's a red zone target for Ben Roethlisberger. They will throw him the ball. He will get a touchdown in most weeks. He's at Oakland, then he's going to bye, home to Philadelphia, at Tennessee, and at Cincinnati. Good schedule. These tight ends have great schedules for production. Guys you should drop. I told you about Aaron Hernandez. Told you about Antonio Gates. They're hurt. Do I recommend dropping them? Not necessarily. But my point is, drop them out of your lineup, out of your starting lineup. Get guys that you can fill in. Do you want to drop Aaron Hernandez? No, he could return in 5 weeks and be just as good. But you need to have someone that can replace him. And if you start Martellus Bennett or Scott Chandler or Kyle Rudolph, you might find that he's just as good as Hernandez was when he's healthy. Same thing with Gates. The last guy I want to tell you to drop is Dustin Keller. He's owned in 57% of leagues. He should not be at all. Drop him completely. Get him off your team. The Jets offense is going to revolve around their wide receivers. Tebow is going to start seeing a lot more time. Get Dustin Keller off of your roster. The last thing I'm going to do on this show is I'm going to give you guys I want you to keep an eye on. Don't pick them up yet, but just a couple guys to look at to see who might have some potential down the road. Give them a couple weeks, make sure their production is consistent. A guy like Greg Little in Cleveland, he got you 11 points last week. He's only owned He's owned in 71%. Excuse me. He's not only owned in 70. He's owned in 71% of PFFL. So most teams out there have him. Most leagues have him on a roster. Check out your league. If you don't, put him on there. He's got potential to be the number one guy. It's a bad Cleveland offense, but number one is number one. Next guy is Jeremy Curley. What'd I tell you about the Jets? It's all about the wide receivers. This guy looks to be Mark Sanchez's favorite target. Is he more of a PPR guy? Yeah, absolutely. But put him on your team, just in case. Not yet. Just keep an eye on him. The last guy is Jaquiz Rodgers, running back for Atlanta. Don't know if you saw the news that late Monday night, Michael Turner got arrested for DUI. Don't know if any charges are going to come from it. Don't know if any punishment from Goodell is going to come from it. But if it does, Jaquiz Rodgers is the guy that's going to step in. And he's getting carries even when Michael Turner is on the field. So just keep an eye on him. So there you go. There's the guys you should add to get a win. Drop if you hate losing. And a few to keep an eye on for the upcoming weeks. Like I said, I'll do this show every Wednesday so you can keep updating your roster and make sure you have a chance to win your league and move up to the next tier, get those great prizes that we all love from PFFL. Plus, don't forget to listen on Fridays when I do my Stardom Situm show. I'll go over my rankings, which come out on Thursday, tell you who should be in your lineup and who should be on the bench. I also host a weekly sports show called The Sports Section, which you can find on iTunes. Keep up to date on all the biggest news in sports, some fantasy talk, but mostly news. Listen to all the great shows we have here on PFFL Radio Network. Tomorrow is PFFL Live with John Hampton. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter at JoshMartin33. For PFFL Radio Network and the Waiver Wire Show, I'm Josh Martin. Keep smiling, keep listening, and always look both ways.